After 3 years of marriage, Ava finally introduced me to the world as her husband. She even went as far as organizing a massive fireworks display to celebrate my birthday. But on that very day, I handed her the divorce papers instead. At the same time, I submitted my application to join an Arctic research expedition. I made this choice because of what happened in my previous life. A year after she had gone public with our marriage, Ava was diagnosed with cancer. To ensure she could focus entirely on her recovery, I chose to get a vasectomy. I also emptied my entire savings account to send her overseas for the best medical care available. I eventually even donated a kidney to save her, keeping her company afloat while my own health withered away. Then, one afternoon, I stumbled upon her secret Twitter account, which contained thousands of posts. In every single photo, the same man was standing right by her side. From their honeymoon to her pregnancy and the birth of their child, they had lived a full and happy life together. It was then I realized her supposed illness had been nothing but a carefully orchestrated performance. Her treatment abroad was merely a cover for her various affairs. She had even given the kidney I donated to her secret lover. I ended up broke and in agony, unable to even afford basic painkillers before I finally collapsed and died alone on the street. Now that I have been given a second chance, I refuse to betray my own heart and have decided to face the world on my own terms. Professor Harrison looked confused when he heard I had changed my mind. He asked why I was suddenly asking for a divorce when I had insisted just days ago that I could never live without my wife. The professor had always respected my work, and this was far from the first time he had invited me to join his institute for a research project in Africa. I had turned him down repeatedly for Ava's sake. I had dedicated my entire existence to her, only to be rewarded with such a miserable end. As those memories flooded back, my voice grew low but resolute. I told him that I hadn't seen things clearly before, but my mind was made up now and I wouldn't change it again. Since I sounded so certain, the professor stopped trying to convince me otherwise. After I hung up, I noticed that although Ava wasn't home yet, she had just appeared in a post on Jeremy Wilson's social media. In the picture, Ava was walking arm in arm with him, her face resting against his shoulder with a tender, devoted smile. The caption under the suggestive photo was brief and said that he had been planning this for a long time and finally got what he wanted. I took a deep breath and quietly tapped the like button. When Ava and I first got married, all my friends were incredibly jealous because they thought I had found the perfect woman who had both beauty and money. They had no idea that my marriage was a total sham from the very start. She never truly viewed me as her husband, and she certainly never loved me. In my past life, Ava always acted like the perfect, supportive wife whenever we were in public. Behind my back, however, she was constantly sneaking around with Jeremy Wilson. Just 4 years into our marriage, she began faking various illnesses to avoid any physical intimacy with me. She used her health as an excuse to flatly refuse having children as well. Her performance was so convincing that I believed every word she said without question. I worked myself to the bone to pay for her medical treatments and was more than happy to give her everything I had. I never imagined that I would grow old only to realize my entire life had been built on her web of lies. When I recall the agonizing chest pain I felt right before I died in my previous life, I remember how I barely had the strength to take a single breath. Luckily, now that I have started over, my body is still in good health. I might be a little exhausted from work events, but I am not suffering from any serious medical conditions. My phone rang and snapped me back to reality while I was lost in thought. It was a call from Ava. She asked if I'd seen her post and told me not to overthink it because it was just a penalty for losing a bet. She gave the excuse dismissively, and I responded in a cold voice. I told her I understood and that I was going to hang up if she didn't have anything else to say. Since I wasn't reacting the way she expected, Ava sounded clearly annoyed. She asked what else I wanted from her after she had already explained herself and told me to stop being so difficult. Her voice was dripping with contempt, but I felt absolutely nothing. In my past life, I would have rushed to defend myself as soon as I heard her speak to me like that. I used to be so afraid of her being angry or misunderstanding me. Now, I couldn't even be bothered to say another word. I could hear the faint sound of men laughing in the background on her end of the line. As the laughter continued, Ava told me coldly that she wasn't coming home tonight as a punishment for my attitude, and that I could sleep alone. She hung up abruptly as soon as she finished speaking. I gripped my phone and a cold smile spread across my face, but I felt a sense of relief I had never known before. I thought to myself that if she didn't love me, I would stop loving her too. My gaze drifted to the birthday candles on the table that were flickering on the verge of going out. I watched the flames die out one by one before slowly closing my eyes. In this lifetime, I'm going to cut Ava out of my life and finally start living for myself. The morning sun was already high in the sky the next day, and the light was blinding as it poured through the window. I climbed out of bed, got cleaned up, and grabbed a quick bite to eat. I was just about to start packing my bags when I heard the front door click open. Ava walked in, propping up Jeremy Wilson, who was clearly still suffering from a heavy hangover. As soon as she stepped into the living room, a look of deep annoyance crossed her face. She demanded to know why the house looked exactly the same as when she left and reminded me that I was supposed to have it cleaned by the time she returned. She glanced around the room with a judgmental tone. I didn't bother responding and just gave her a brief, indifferent look. After Ava got Jeremy settled on the couch, she turned to me and said she wasn't going to pick a fight today. She explained that Jeremy had too much to drink at the party last night, so she brought him here to sober up. She told me to make him some hangover soup and reminded me not to use ginger since he hated it. I looked up at her and told her in a flat voice that if he wanted soup, he could make it himself because I wasn't their maid. Ava stared at me in shock as if she couldn't believe what she just heard. Once the meaning of my words sank in, her expression darkened and her face went cold. She asked me what my problem was and why I was being so petty while Jeremy was in such a state. Without even looking at her, I told her that my hand was injured and I couldn't cook. Ava finally noticed the bandages on my hand after I mentioned it. Her face stiffened and she looked embarrassed for a split second. She admitted she had forgotten I was hurt while saving her a few days ago and told me to just rest. Then she quickly changed the subject and told me in an impatient tone to stop bringing it up. I didn't feel like talking anymore, so I just grabbed some clean clothes and headed to the bathroom. Jeremy was starting to wake up by the time I finished my shower. Ava was sitting on his lap and hand-feeding him pieces of fruit. She looked visibly uncomfortable the moment she saw me. Jeremy gave me a cold, mocking smile as soon as our eyes met. The blatant hostility in his gaze was impossible to miss. I had no interest in interacting with him, so I turned to head back to the bedroom. Ava stopped me with her icy voice, telling me she had left some breakfast on the table and warned me not to say she never thought about me. I glanced at the table and saw that the food was already cold and stale. A wave of bitterness began to wash over me. Ava had never cooked a single meal for me in all the years we were married. I had always assumed she just didn't know how, so I happily took over all the cooking and chores myself. It was clear to me now that she simply didn't care enough to put in the effort. I spent every year agonized over finding the perfect birthday gift for her. In return, I never received so much as a genuine thank you. Jeremy could give her a cheap rose from a gas station, and she would be happy for days. It is in these small details that the presence or absence of love becomes obvious. I told her I had already eaten and left it at that. Ava looked confused and asked about the leftover cake in the fridge, wondering if it had been someone's birthday yesterday. I let out a dry laugh because the irony was almost painful. Ava knew every detail of Jeremy Wilson's life, yet she couldn't even remember her own husband's birthday. My heart felt heavy, but I kept my voice steady and told her I had just bought it on a whim. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but Jeremy interrupted with a fake look of surprise. He asked if yesterday had been my birthday. Ava turned pale the moment he said that. Her eyes widened, and she started to stammer my name. Jeremy stood up before she could say another word. He put on a dramatic show of sympathy and told me he was sorry that Ava had been with him last night and couldn't celebrate my birthday, then told me not to blame her. Jeremy fake coughed while clutching his chest as if he were fragile. He told me that if I was upset, I should take it out on him instead and that I could even hit or yell at him. His voice shook as if he were the victim, but I could see the malicious spark of provocation in his eyes. I acted like it didn't bother me and kept a calm smile on my face. I walked over to the fridge, grabbed the leftover cake, and tossed it straight into the garbage. I told him it didn't matter since my birthday wasn't important to her anyway, and that he was the only one she cared about. Ava jumped to her feet and glared at me with pure rage. Ava yelled at me for talking nonsense and reminded me that they had been friends since childhood. She argued that they had known each other far longer than she had known me and claimed they would have been together years ago if there was anything between them. She let out a cold laugh and asked if I was really going to be this petty just because she missed one birthday. She accused me of being narrow-minded and taking my frustrations out on an innocent person. She demanded that I apologize to Jeremy Wilson right then and there. As I listened to her talk down to me, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. I felt completely drained, and the longer I stayed silent, the angrier Ava became. Her voice turned sharp, and her expression twisted with rage. She snapped at me for my attitude and reminded me she was speaking to me. She grabbed my wrist, her fingers digging right into my injury. A jolt of pain shot through me, but her face was pale with fury. Jeremy started a fake sob, his voice trembling on purpose. He told her to stop fighting on his account and said it was his fault I was upset before announcing he was leaving. He headed for the door with red eyes, making sure to look as flustered and hurt as possible. I watched him walk away while Ava looked at him with nothing but worry and pity. She shoved me out of the way and ran out after Jeremy Wilson. She turned back to give me one last hateful glare before she left and told me she must have been blind to ever marry me. I was done dealing with her, so I called a friend to help me draft the divorce papers. Then I started packing up my belongings. Looking at the nearly empty suitcase, I felt a wave of complicated emotions. I didn't actually own much since most of the stuff in the house belonged to Ava. The rest were just things meant for couples. I was the one who had carefully picked out all the matching mugs, pajamas, and decorations. Ava never cared about any of it and would always mock me for being immature whenever she saw them. Her secret Twitter told a different story, though, as it was filled with photos of her and Jeremy Wilson in matching outfits. They looked so close and happy in every picture. Looking back at those images now, they felt like a cruel joke at the expense of my own stupidity. None of that mattered anymore, though. I was leaving tomorrow, and those things meant nothing to me now. I tried to stop myself from dwelling on the past, but the sound of footsteps at the door broke my train of thought. Ava finally came home. She walked in with a stern expression and asked why I hadn't sent her any messages to apologize like I usually did when she left angry. She demanded to know why I hadn't even bothered to check on her and was clearly unsettled by my unusual behavior. I simply asked her if it hadn't always been that way, which only made her even angrier. She told me to stop being sarcastic and asked if I was really going to hold a grudge just because of a few words she said. She told me I needed to learn how to be more forgiving. I just stared at her and let her talk until she was finished. My face remained completely blank, and I showed no emotion at all. Ava and I had joined the same club during our junior year of college. Between rehearsals and events, we started spending almost all of our time together. We naturally grew closer over time. It was obvious she liked me, but back then I knew we came from two very different worlds. I figured our relationship wouldn't go anywhere. Ava didn't give up, though, and she was always finding new ways to be kind to me. She would stay late with me, take over my shifts, and bring me meals. Little by little, I started to develop feelings for her, too. It was only natural that we eventually started dating. I could never deny the history we shared during those early years. That was exactly why I fell so hard for her in my past life. I stayed with her until it eventually destroyed me. Now that I could see things for what they really were, I coldly told her that I wanted a divorce. Ava was stunned for a moment before she started laughing. She asked me when I had learned to play these kinds of games. She told me not to think she would fall for my little tricks. She said if I had time to throw a tantrum, I should use it to apologize to Jeremy Wilson instead. She told me that if I made her happy, she might just forget about the whole thing. I just stared at her with eyes that were as cold and still as a dead lake. I repeated myself slowly and clearly, telling her that I was serious about wanting a divorce. She looked surprised at first, but then she gave a dismissive laugh. She reminded me how hard I'd fought to marry her, even when her parents mocked me. She mentioned how much effort it took for me to finally marry her and asked if I was really sure about wanting a divorce now. She told me that even her parents would think I was joking if I ever told them that. In my past life, Ava's parents had always looked down on me. They were completely against our marriage once they found out I was an orphan with no money or status. I remember the day I went to propose so clearly because the moment I mentioned the word marriage, her mother's face turned cold. She told me that she had never approved of the match and that she and her husband would have stopped it if Ava hadn't been so insistent. Her voice was like ice as she explained that all of Ava's assets would remain her own personal property after the wedding. She warned me that I wouldn't get a single cent if we ever got a divorce and told me to give up now if I was only after their money. She pulled a prenuptial agreement out of her bag and tossed it onto the table in front of me. Everything was spelled out in detail. I would have to get her permission for every single transaction involving her assets, and she had the right to say no whenever she wanted. The agreement stated that I would leave with nothing in the event of a divorce. Back then, I was so blinded by love that I didn't care about any of that. I didn't take their warnings seriously and just assumed they didn't know me well enough yet. It took a long time for me to realize that the love I was so desperate to protect was nothing but a joke to everyone else. I looked at the smug expression on Ava's face and told her it didn't matter if she believed me or not because my mind was made up. As soon as I finished speaking, Ava lost her temper and slapped me across the face. Her eyes were filled with rage and shame. My cheeks stung from the blow, but I kept my composure and let my expression turn even colder. My phone started ringing before I could say a word, and I saw Jeremy Wilson's name on the screen. Jeremy was on the line, complaining about a severe stomach ache and claiming he had no medicine at his place. I watched her entire demeanor change as her eyes softened immediately. She stepped away to whisper some comforting words to him as she grabbed her purse in a panic and got ready to head out. She stopped at the door to give me one last icy warning, telling me never to bring up divorce again if I knew what was good for me. She threatened that I would regret it if she ever decided to stop being so patient with me. Then she slammed the door and was gone. I stood alone in the quiet house, staring at the door she had just stormed out of. My mind was racing, but I felt more relieved than anything else. I knew there was no future left for us. I forced myself to let go of the very last bit of affection I had for her. I left the divorce papers right where she couldn't miss them. Then I grabbed my bags and headed straight for the airport. Meanwhile, Ava stayed with Jeremy Wilson until she was sure he was okay. As she walked down the street, she was busy texting him. She was trying to plan a dinner at her parents' house for the next day. She still hadn't heard back from him by the time she got in her car to head home. She opened their chat to send another message, but then she realized their last conversation had actually been 3 days ago. She scrolled up and saw that the screen was filled with messages from me. I used to text her every day about work and things going on around the house. My messages had always been kind, while her replies were usually short and dismissive. She realized then that I hadn't sent her a single text in 3 days. The sudden change made her feel strangely anxious. She wondered why things had suddenly shifted. Ava hesitated for a second before trying to call me. It rang for a while, but I didn't pick up. Everything had seemed fine yesterday, so she couldn't understand why she couldn't reach me now. A sense of dread began to wash over her. Her chest felt tight as she tried to tell herself I was probably just angry. She was desperately looking for any excuse to calm her nerves. She kept telling the driver to hurry up while she obsessively redialed my number. She kept hanging up and calling back as if her life depended on it. The sun was already starting to come up by the time she got home. The house was so quiet that it felt eerie. Ava called out my name as she walked inside. She felt a sudden jolt of panic that began to spread through her entire body. She kept calling for me, but there was no answer. It was clear that the house was empty. The thing that actually terrified her wasn't my absence, but the fact that all of my belongings were gone. My side of the closet was empty, and all of my paperwork had been cleared out of the study. Even my toothbrush and razor were missing from the bathroom. Even the framed photo of us that used to sit on the cabinet was gone. It was as if I had never even lived there. Ava stood in the middle of the living room, her entire body shaking. She had expected me to yell at her or break something, but she never expected this. She never imagined that I would simply vanish from her life entirely. She kept looking around the room, refusing to believe what was happening. Her eyes finally landed on a stack of papers on a coffee table. It was a copy of my identity deregistration and a signed divorce agreement. Ava's hands were shaking as she reached for the papers. As she read through the lines, her vision blurred and her heart felt like it was sinking into an endless abyss of ice. In her state of shock, she vividly remembered how calm I had looked when I first told her I wanted a divorce. She realized then that I had planned everything out. Once all the pieces clicked into place, she collapsed onto the floor like a lost child. Her tears fell onto the floor, forming a small puddle as she sobbed. Over the next few weeks, Ava became desperate, searching everywhere and asking everyone she knew for any information about where I might be. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find a single lead. She even reached out to every one of my friends, but none of them had any answers for her. She soon discovered that I had blocked and deleted everyone we knew. It was as if I had vanished from the face of the earth, leaving no trace of my existence behind. That was the moment Ava finally realized she had lost the one person she thought would always be there for her. She had always assumed I would wait for her forever, no matter how badly she treated me. Jeremy Wilson heard the news of my disappearance pretty quickly. He decided to stop playing games and went straight to Ava's house. When she opened the door, she looked so exhausted that he almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was a mess, and her eyes were puffy from crying. A look of disgust flashed across Jeremy's face for a second before he hid it behind a mask of sympathy. He told her how heartbroken he was to see her in such a state. He said he was worried about my disappearance too, but insisted she needed to take care of herself. He brought her some food and begged her to eat since she had lost so much weight. Ava started to say his name, intending to ask if he had any idea why I had left. He cut her off before she could finish and told her he knew what she was going to ask. He promised her that he would always be there for her, no matter what. He told her he would heat up the food so they could talk properly later before heading into the kitchen. Ava just stood there watching him, her mind spinning with a million different thoughts. Just then, Jeremy's phone on the table buzzed with a new notification. She had a sudden urge to look at it and was shocked to see that the message was part of a conversation with me. She couldn't understand why Jeremy Wilson was talking to me when they had always hated each other. Curious, she opened the chat history. She was met with a long list of taunting photos and messages that Jeremy had sent to me. His cruel words felt like ice-cold needles stabbing into her soul. Her heart sank as she finally understood why I had been so determined to get a divorce. Jeremy came back with the food and immediately saw her holding his phone. His fake kindness vanished instantly and was replaced by a surge of pure anger. He rushed over and ripped the phone out of her hand. He screamed at her, demanding to know what she was doing and who gave her permission to touch his things. Ava was speechless and felt a crushing weight on her chest. She couldn't believe he was capable of being so manipulative. She asked him if she hadn't done enough for him by giving him a job, money, and even buying him a house and a car. She wanted to know why he would betray her like this. Her voice shook with disappointment and confusion. Jeremy tried to tell her she was getting it all wrong. Jeremy struggled to come up with an excuse, but he sounded guilty. He took a breath and tried to claim he did it all for her and for their future together. Ava laughed bitterly and asked if his idea of a future was just driving me away so he could take my spot. She reminded him that she had warned him not to try anything and told him that her only husband was me. She blamed him entirely for driving me away. Ava's gaze turned sharp and cold. Jeremy finally dropped the act and let his true, malicious nature show. He told her it wasn't his fault and mocked her for acting like she actually cared. He reminded her that she was the one who left me alone on my birthday. He pointed out that she was the one out with other men and that she was the one who had abandoned me while I was in the hospital. He reminded her that she had just stood there and watched while her parents humiliated me in public. Ava stood there in silence, unable to find the words to defend herself. Meanwhile, I was thousands of miles away in Africa, completely focused on my research. In my previous life, Ava had begged me to turn down the offer when the Research Institute first hired me. She had complained about me leaving so soon after our wedding and asked how she was supposed to cope alone. She told me it would be impossible for us to ever see each other if I was always traveling. She had asked me to stay and help her run the company instead. I was actually touched back then because I thought she just couldn't bear to be away from me. I ended up turning down the job for her. It wasn't until much later that I realized she had only used our marriage to keep me tied down at the office. She had stopped me from joining the team just so she could keep seeing Jeremy Wilson behind my back. I'm so glad I finally took the chance to live for myself this time around. I spent 6 long years working in Africa, often sleeping outdoors and traveling nonstop. Our team finally made a major breakthrough, and we were clear to head back home. I never expected that Ava would somehow find out exactly when my flight was landing. She was waiting right at the exit and blocked my path as soon as I walked out. She stared at me as if she were trying to make sure I was actually real. Her eyes filled with tears immediately. I just looked at her with complete indifference. Ava had changed a lot over the years and no longer looked like the young girl I once knew. She had wrinkles around her eyes and looked pale and sickly thin. She looked absolutely exhausted. As soon as she realized it was really me, she threw herself into my arms and started sobbing uncontrollably. She kept crying about how I was finally back. I pushed her away and took a few steps back to get some space. She looked heartbroken when I pushed her. She stumbled forward and grabbed my arm with a shaking voice. She begged me to remember her and told me how she had spent years searching for me. I told her very clearly that we were divorced and that she needed to respect my boundaries. Ava started shaking and asked if I was still mad at her. She apologized for everything and begged me not to leave her again. I couldn't help but laugh when I heard her finally apologize after all this time. Even to me, my laughter sounded bitter. I told her that I didn't even blame her anymore. I explained that I had only left because I stopped loving her and asked her to leave me alone for good. Her eyes were red as she argued that the divorce wasn't valid since she had never signed the papers. She looked desperate as she told me she didn't want a divorce. She promised to change anything if I would just come back to her. She was holding on to me so tightly that I had to force her to let go. I pushed her away once more, causing her to stumble back and fall onto the pavement. I told her she should just sign the papers already. I warned her that if she kept bothering me, I would see her in court. Ava stared at me with tear-filled eyes and asked in a raspy voice if we really didn't have a chance. She asked how I could just give up after 7 years and everything we had been through together. Her question was honestly pathetic. My feelings for her hadn't just vanished in a single day. They had been slowly drained away by her constant betrayals. I told her that I had given up because I simply didn't love her anymore. I told her that my love for her died the second I asked for a divorce. She looked like she had seen a ghost. After a long silence, she begged me, saying she loved me and couldn't live without me. I told her that was her problem to deal with. I told her she needed to focus on finishing the divorce instead of waiting for me to come back. My coldness seemed to drain the life right out of her. She looked completely hopeless and couldn't even find the words to respond. She eventually just let her hands drop to her sides and stood there crying. I turned around and walked away with the airport staff without looking back once. I figured I had made myself clear enough for her to finally stop. But the next day, she didn't send over the signed papers. Instead, she showed up with a breakfast she had made herself. I asked her what she was doing since I had no idea what her angle was this time. Ava looked down and told me in a quiet voice that it was her turn to take care of me since I had always looked after her in the past. She said she hoped I would see how much she cared so we could go back to the way things were. I cut her off and told her I already had a girlfriend. I told her to stop bothering me because it would upset my girlfriend and that she needed to move on. Ava asked if I really loved someone else while her whole body started to shake. Before I could say anything else, I heard a familiar voice calling my name. I looked up and saw Hannah Thompson walking toward us. She looked radiant in a simple white dress. She was naturally beautiful and had a very calm, intelligent presence. She didn't notice Ava until she got close and asked me who she was. Then she naturally took my arm. Ava just stared at Hannah as a look of deep insecurity washed over her. The contrast between them seemed to break her spirit. I told Hannah that Ava was just an old friend. Ava's expression faltered, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. She managed to keep from crying and told me in a shaky voice that she realized she had lost me for good. She wished me a happy life. Despite her words, tears started streaming down her face. It took her a moment to pull herself together and wipe her eyes. She tried to hide her pain behind a forced smile. I didn't care how much she was hurting because it was nothing compared to the agony I felt when I died in my previous life. I didn't even give her a second glance as I turned and walked away with Hannah. I thought that was finally the end of it. To my surprise, I got a call from my former mother-in-law that very night. Seeing her name on my phone brought back a lot of bad memories. She had always been the one person most against my marriage to Ava in both of my lives. She only let us get married because Ava and I were so stubborn about it. Just thinking about all the times she had insulted me made me feel annoyed. I just hung up on her, but she kept calling back over and over again. I finally gave up and answered the phone. Her mother was frantic and told me that something had happened to Ava and that I needed to get to the hospital immediately. I cut her off and coldly told her that Ava's problems weren't my business since I wasn't a doctor. I reminded her that we were divorced and told her never to call me again. There was a long silence before I heard her start to sob. She begged me to come for the sake of our history. She said Ava might not survive this time and asked if I could really just let her die. She sounded so completely broken that I felt a surge of unease. I finally gave in and told her to send me the address. I raced to the hospital as soon as we hung up. I was driving fast as my mind was filled with a growing sense of dread. Ava's mother was sitting by the bed when I arrived. She burst into tears the moment she saw me. She looked at me with a desperate kind of hope and told me through her tears that Ava had tried to kill herself the night before. She said they had barely managed to save her. She said Ava was still disoriented and didn't even recognize her own mother, but she kept calling for me. I walked over to bed and saw that Ava's face was deathly pale. Her wrists were covered in thick bandages. She seemed to sense I was there and struggled to open her eyes. She managed to give me a weak smile and whisper my name. She apologized for being a burden and said she just wanted to see me one last time. She tried to reach out for me, but her hand fell back to the bed before she could touch me. She asked me again if there was really no hope for us. I didn't argue and just told her that the past was in the past and that there was no going back. Ava gave a sad laugh as if she already knew what I would say. She said she understood why no one would want someone who had hurt them so badly and called it her own karma. She looked like she had more to say, but she stayed silent. She just watched me leave with tearful eyes as her tears continued to fall. Ava didn't try to contact me again after that. I heard she spent a week in the hospital before her mother took her home. A few days later, my lawyer sent over the final divorce papers. They weren't the same unfair terms her parents had tried to force on me before. There was no mention of the prenuptial agreement at all. Instead, it stated that all assets would be split equally between us. My half of the money was transferred to my account without any issues. I signed the papers, but I didn't feel as relieved as I thought I would. I realized then that true closure doesn't come from a legal document. It only comes when you're finally able to let go in your heart. 6 months went by in the blink of an eye. During that time, Hannah and I got engaged and finally made it to our wedding day. It was a beautiful, sunny day for the wedding. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows made the red carpet look almost magical. Hannah looked stunning in her white gown as she walked slowly down the aisle. She stood by my side in front of all our friends and family. We exchanged rings and shared our first kiss as a married couple while everyone cheered. Later at the reception, we went around to thank all of our guests. I accidentally bumped into someone while making our rounds. It had been 6 years, and the man standing in front of me was almost unrecognizable. He was unshaven, gaunt, and had a hollow look in his eyes. I wouldn't have even known it was Jeremy Wilson if it weren't for the same shifty look in his eyes. I was confused about why he was even there as Jeremy started walking toward me with a dark expression. I felt a sudden sense of danger when I saw his face. I was about to say something when he suddenly pulled a knife out of his sleeve. He screamed that it was all my fault and blamed me for Ava leaving him. He yelled that I was the reason his life was in ruins. He glared at me with pure hatred and said I had taken everything from him. He threatened that if he couldn't be happy, then I wouldn't be allowed to live either. He stared at me with bloodshot eyes before charging at me like a madman. I managed to dodge him at the last second. The knife sliced through the air with a terrifying sound. The room immediately broke into chaos as guests started screaming and running for the exits. My only thought was to get Hannah behind me, but Jeremy was already lunging at me again. He was too close and moving too fast for me to get away. Right as he was about to strike, Ava suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She threw herself in front of me and took the blow herself. The knife went deep into her stomach and blood began to soak through her dress. Ava's face went white, but she didn't let go of Jeremy's wrist. Jeremy stood there in shock, as if he had just woken up from a nightmare. He seemed to snap out of it and the knife fell from his hand. Security rushed in and tackled him to the ground immediately. Ava collapsed, and I caught her before she hit the floor. She was barely breathing, but she managed to give me a small smile. She whispered that she had only come to wish me a happy wedding. As she lost more blood, her breathing actually seemed to become more regular. It was as if a great weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She told me to just consider this her wedding gift to me. She said she had finally paid back everything she owed me. No one else knew what she meant, but I understood perfectly. This was her way of making up for everything she had done to me in our past life. Her voice was fading, so I just held her hand. I was overwhelmed with a mix of emotions I couldn't even describe. The police took Jeremy away, and Ava was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Luckily, the doctors were able to save her after working through the night. Jeremy Wilson was eventually sentenced to 30 years in prison for attempted murder. He was going to spend the rest of his life behind bars. I stopped by the hospital to see Ava one last time before I left town. She was still very pale as she lay in a hospital bed. She looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. She apologized for ruining my wedding, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. She told me the knife had caused permanent nerve damage and that she would likely be bedridden for the rest of her life. She said she felt like it was her divine punishment. She started crying again as she spoke. I told her coldly that she had brought this on herself. Her tears fell as I turned to leave. I didn't say another word, and I never bothered to check if she ever recovered. After I left the hospital, Hannah and I left the country to start our new life together overseas. Hannah gave birth to a beautiful baby girl a year later. The delivery room was filled with joy and celebration the moment she was born. Looking at my daughter's face, I realized she was the most precious gift this second life could have ever given me. I took Hannah's hand and felt overwhelming gratitude that I finally had the chance to protect someone who actually deserved my love. This story does not end with a reconciliation, but with everyone finally finding their true place in the world. James has a daughter and a wife who truly loves him, while Ava remains in her wheelchair, accepting her fate as karma. He didn't look back even once. If you are giving your all to a relationship only to end up completely drained, please remember that love is not about demeaning yourself. True love is when two people truly see and value one another. You do not owe anyone your forgiveness, but you do owe yourself the chance to start over. I hope you have the courage to love and the strength to walk away when it is time. The best way to move on is to never look back.